Trump is introducing a 50-year mortgage, and there's a lot to get into here about the pros and the cons of that.
With the 50-year mortgage, we just really wonder if it's actually the key to unlocking affordability, or is it actually a death trap in disguise? So we're going to have some conversation about that today and see what we think.
Absolutely. I mean, this would be a game changer in so many ways, a 50-year mortgage. What's interesting is the 30-year mortgage was introduced by Roosevelt as part of his New Deal. So before that, everyone just had a 15. And obviously, when the 30-year mortgage hit, what happened to house prices? They went up, because people could then, finance it over a longer term. And people tend to solve to their monthly payment.
Yeah. So with a 50-year mortgage, that would lower your monthly payment, but is it really that good of a thing? There's several pros and cons that we'll unpack today.
Yeah. And I think too, is just, when you talk about 50-year mortgages, boomers immediately hate it. They say it's a terrible financial decision. They say you're paying so much more interest, et cetera, et cetera. But boomers typically have houses, So then when you talk to Gen Z, they the buyers that we work with, a lot of these first-time home buyers, they would love to have $500 or $600 a month off of their mortgage, even if it was a 50-year. And then they'll figure it out later, when they make some more money or whatever. So it's really easy to knock it when you're sitting with a house and maybe some rental properties. It's harder to knock it when you're out there looking for a house right now with these prices.
Yeah, and just with inflation and affordability, a $500 or $600 a month is a lot to a lot of people. So if you're saving a little bit on your monthly mortgage payment, it could be closer to what renting is, which makes it, more competitive. But then on the flip side of that, what does that do to asset prices? It pushes them up. So it'll be interesting to see if the 50-year mortgage does get approved, what that'll do to our local and regional markets and asset prices.
Well, I think you have to start before we get into the pros and cons about the unknowns, right? Because all we know, well, for one, Trump tweeted about it a month or two ago. And I didn't take much regard to that because Trump tweets a lot of things. But now somebody on one of his committees, the Pulte, right, the home builder, is now saying they're working with him on it. So that makes me pause and think that this is something that could really come into fruition.
Yeah, and Trump's a real estate guy. That's his history. Like him or leave him, that's his history and that's what he does. So paying attention to some of those hints that he's been dropping, and it's been more than once. So it's like, okay, if there's some traction to this, which it seems like there is, then being ready and having the conversation now puts everybody into a better position if it does get implemented to sort of know what to expect when the time comes.
Yeah, and you can't be emotional about this stuff. People get so worked up, and we always say you can complain about the game or you can get in the game and play by the rules, right? So if the 50-year comes out, there's nothing you can do about it. You can put your, feet in the sand and say, I would never do that. But, you also have to realize that this could be a great opportunity, especially for investors, if it's offered to them to get some cash flowing rentals and, get ahead of this inflation. And that is one of the unknowns, right? Like, who is this for? Is it going to be for primary residents, first time home buyer? Is it going to be for investors as well? Like, do we get included? We don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other question would be, or an unknown would be, what will the interest rates be? How much higher will a 50-year mortgage be versus a 30-year mortgage? And does it make sense? In some instances it might, but really that's a major unknown that we really don't know at this point.
Well, and are the banks going to offer it, right? I mean, we're the only, one of the only countries in the whole world that offers a 30-year fixed mortgage right now. Other countries say they have a 30-year fix, but they don't. They just mean they have a 30-year mortgage, and every 5 years, like in Canada, they call it a fixed rate, but it's not. It resets every 5 years. So asking the banks to lock something in for 50 years with this type of inflation, that's going to be interesting too. And that could be a hurdle to all of this.
Yeah, and some investors look at that mortgage or that debt as an asset, so it really is, are you hedging against that inflation? And is that the right move? Where an unknown would be talking about holding time. Should you really do a 50-year mortgage if you're only planning to live somewhere for 5 years? Does that make sense? dries
Exactly.
out.
Yep. And is it fixed the whole time, right? Because I could see the banks almost doing it like a Canadian model where it's like, okay, yeah, we'll give you a fixed 50-year loan, but then every 5 years we're going to reset it, or so, because it
Yeah.
in times of high inflation, it is not a good thing for the bank to have this fixed rate loan that's lower than interest goes. Like a lot of people right now are sitting in 3% and 4% mortgages. The bank is losing money on those because they're paying more money than you're paying to hold that cash.
Yeah.
So now if you're asking them to do it 50, that's even longer.
Well, exactly. And so when you talk about breaking it down on that 50-year mortgage, so yes, it's fixed and it's amortized over 50. And that's what I think some clients or buyers get confused of, where it's like it's amortized over that 30 years or 50 years, but the interest balloons at year 5 and then it resets. So essentially you're redoing your loan at that time.
Yep.
So yes, your payments are still lower, but then they could go up, where right now you can lock and load for 30 years in the United States. You're right. Canada, every 5 years, they've got to wonder, has their wages gone up enough to afford the higher payments or the then interest rates? So I think you do see more turnover in other countries, as not as much as we do here.
Well, and the other question somebody asked as well that I thought was good was, do you give a 70-year-old a 50-year loan? Like, is there going to be an age? Because I do know that in other countries that offer these type of products, there is a cap on the age somebody can get them. So like Japan has 50-year loans, but you have to be a certain age to get the loan, because obviously if you're 70, you're probably not living to 120. So how do they kind of collaborate on that?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it really is, and so let's walk through the pros and the cons, because I know people out there, I already know this is going to rile people up. They're going to be upset about it. They're going to say home prices need to crash and we don't need a 50-year mortgage. But let's talk about the pros to it. And the obvious number one pro is you're going to have a lower monthly payment.
Yep. Primarily, number one, that's what is going to be super appealing, is that lower monthly payment. Which then increases your purchasing power. So if you have a lower monthly payment, you can afford to spend a little bit more because you're still going to meet that debt to income ratio. But if you read between the lines, that kind of moves into a con because it could push asset prices higher. So you kind of have this cyclical thing. How is it going to all work and shake out in the real world, to be determined?
Yeah, it really is going to be interesting. But, I will tell you, working with clients, as this too, they're always solving to their monthly. Like, we decide their price point based on what they can afford monthly. I have very few clients that are like, Danille, I don't care about interest rates. This is my budget. I'm not going over this dollar amount. It is typically, I only want to pay, $2,000 a month, and that's my budget. And if interest rates go down, I can afford more house. If I do a 50-year mortgage, I can afford more house. But this is all I can afford monthly.
Yeah. And I think it's great that people know what they're comfortable with, because a bank could approve you up to $400,000. Well, then are you comfortable with that payment? No, I want, like you said, buyers solve for X on what they want their monthly payment to be. And that is a good thing. So,
and one could argue. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, one can argue that that's a smart thing too. You know what I mean? Like, you don't owe, the difference in a monthly payment over 30 years of $50,000 more, equity is very, very small. Right. And so sometimes, if you're going to get what you want, it's not a bad idea to solve for the monthly as long as you can afford the monthly.
Yeah. Which is so true. And another pro is that for investors, if it is implemented for investors,
we're included,
yes, we'll see, is the increased cash flow, because rental prices are, still the same. But if you could purchase a property and have a lower monthly payment, then that does increase cash flow. So will you see an influx or an increase in investors purchasing homes? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, the thing about Trump is, you can make a lot of arguments on like who's going to qualify for this. But truthfully, the first-time home buyers need it the most. But if you need homes to sell and people are in 3% and 4% mortgages, you need to give them an incentive to sell and, upgrade their house. Like, there's a lot of people in a small house that want a bigger house for their family, but the jump from a 3% rate to a 6.5% rate on a more expensive house is just way too big of an increase in payment. But if you let them break that down over 50 years, you're narrowing that gap between what they have and then what they will have, right? But I think, adding in investors could create more of an asset bubble. However, if Trump wants the real estate market moving and he's a real estate man, investors will be very quick to jump on this, quicker than home buyers will, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And, if it was only allowed to first-time home buyers, like you said, we're not going to see the inventory shake loose or the market move as much as it needs to move, because I think, what is the statistic? Over 50% of the mortgages in the US are less than 4% right now. So if it doesn't open up to essentially everybody or most everybody, then it's not going to move like we need it to really get the economy going again.
Well, what I think is interesting too, and those listening, I mean, please take this into account, is, people get mad because investors get deals, right? But what they don't understand is investors know what they're doing on a professional level, and a lot of times home buyers don't, because they only do this once or twice their whole life, and investors do this a lot. So, what could happen with this is investors jump in and take advantage of these 50-year loans, and then that might jack asset prices, and then home buyers will wait to see what happens and then kind of miss out, right? And so, part of the point of this channel is to teach you guys how to also think like investors think, and kind of open the hood for you guys so you can see that, and just know that, you're getting in the game. Say you can't afford a 30-year, say you want a $600,000 house and you can't afford it on a 30-year mortgage. So you're trying to save up more money to be able to afford it. Well, by the time you save up that money, that $600,000 house might be $650,000. So now you have to save even more money. Whereas if you get in the game on this 50-year, it might not be your forever. I'm not saying you should hold a 50-year for 50 years and pay it, all the way through. But what it can do is it can get you in the game. So then if you're able to buy that $600,000 house, when it appreciates to $650,000, you now get the benefit of that, right? And then as you make more money and inflation increases and your wages go up, you can refinance into a 15 or 30 year as long as you can afford the payment, right? Versus just sitting and waiting and saving and missing out.
Yeah. Well, and I think that something that's very important to remember is, just because you amortize something over 30 or over 50 years doesn't mean you can't make the 30-year payments. You can still pay down extra, but at least it's not a must. If you have to, pull back a month and, save a little bit, you can still pay ahead. I mean, essentially, if they're structured the same way as 30 years, there's going to be no prepayment penalty for your primary mortgage. So same with 15 years. Some people get a 15-year. It's like, you could pay off a 30-year in 15, just make extra payments, but then you're not bound to that higher payment if you do have an emergency or if something comes up. So long-term fixed rate debt is the best kind of debt. The longer you can stretch it out, great. You can still pay extra.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And two, just like, don't just sit and wait and miss out. As long as you can afford the payment monthly, that is the biggest thing if you're a home buyer, that you should, and you like the house and it's a good time for you, you should do it. You shouldn't wait to put down that extra $50,000 that might take you 2 or 3 or 5 years to save to then be able to buy the house that you want. Because I can tell you the house that you want is now even more expensive. So you just have to think a little bit like an investor. You want to make these kind of decisions with, information and knowledge, and you want to lean on a good realtor for that. But you also have to understand that, a lot of things it's really good to save for and pay cash for and all that. But there's a lot of things that you'd be so much better off if you didn't do that, like housing,
Yeah. And it's hard to wrap your mind around that, because you're always taught save, 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 no debt, no debt. But it's sort of challenging that and being smart about it and learning how finances work and how money works, and then making it work for you. So
and it's a great time. Yeah, and it's a great time right now because buyers still have the advantage in the market. Now, if the 50-year comes out and we start to flood the market with people that couldn't afford and now they can, and especially investors, if things start to cash flow, that'll be a huge one. Then now you're competing against investors. Now you're competing against other buyers. Now it potentially could even be a seller's market again, right? And then you don't have that upper hand. And right now I can tell you, if you're making offers on houses in most markets, you're not really competing with investors anymore, right? I mean, I have some investors, but it is like few and far between. So now is your time, because as a home buyer, you know, you have this upper hand. So you don't want to wait. You want to take advantage of that.
Yeah. And if you ask the question, and whether it's a 30 or 50-year mortgage, is inflation going to go down?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. So when you can buy an asset and hold that asset, 9 times out of 10, you're going to come out on the right side of things if you take care of it. So home ownership or in rental investment property, super important, great wealth building tool. And that's why we're here.
Absolutely. And when people say, you know, home prices cannot go up because they're so expensive already, I know this is hard to believe, but in Canada, the average price of a home is $750. So you really have to, and their wages aren't that much different than ours. So you really have to wrap your mind around, yes, they can, because people solve to their monthly. And if they legit create a 50-year mortgage, that is absolutely going to make asset prices go up. And let's move into the cons, because that is one of the cons, right? It's going to make asset prices go up. But hold on for a second. That's only a con if you don't own anything, okay? You have to remember, anything, huge con. If you own property, you love that it's going up. If you're an investor with multiple rentals, you love that it's going up. It's only a con to you if you don't get in the game.
Yeah. So it's like, what side of the coin are you on, and where do you want to be? Set your goals and get there. Another con would be you're slower to build equity. So interest on an amortized loan, interest is front loaded. And so you're paying more interest, or a higher percentage of your payment is interest. So if your lifetime interest cost is, extremely higher on a 50-year note.
It is. But then to your point, as you said, you don't have to just pay the amount on the 50. If you want to put in extra money and pay it like it's a 30 or 15, or you can do that. And really, like, the difference between a 15 and a 30 year is usually 1/4 to 0.5%. So that would be my guess, if it's fixed, what the difference in this would be as well. Just based on, the 15 year versus the 30 is 15 more additional years. This is 20 more additional years than the 30. So it's got to be right around there. And Josh brought up a good point. He said in Canada, the average price of a home is $750,000, and they don't even have a, 30-year fixed rate. So, I mean, the Canadians can't believe that our housing market is so cheap. I know that's hard to believe for those of you listening, but they really can't. And they can't believe that we get debt fixed for 30 years.
Yeah, which is wild. Mm-hmm. Another con is that, if you're not building as equity as fast and the market does ebb and flow a little bit, you might be, I don't want to say upside down, but you just don't build equity as quickly, which, there's pros and cons to that.
Well, and I think you can get stuck, right? Like, if you want to buy a house and live in it for 5 years, and then you're like, okay, I'm going to sell it. If you are upside down, you either have to stay, or you can sell it for a loss, which nobody wants to do. So you are building equity slower on the 50. But that being said, as you build it slow on the 30 too, it's like the 15 is the way. If you're really trying to pay down your loan really quick, paying it over 15 saves you a significant amount of money. But I probably wouldn't do any kind of 50-year product unless I was planning on staying in a home 10 years, and like really living there. Or you can rent it after. I mean, there's a lot of options, but you're not planning on selling it for at least 10 years, because if the market were to go down, you're not going to have much equity paid off, even though you've made, 5 years of mortgage payments.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think one of the other things is prices will start to be based on the 50-year. I think that if this really turns into a product that is mass distributed and anybody can use it, that's what happened with Roosevelt. People used to get 15-year mortgages. Now almost everyone gets a 30. And if this product is released, then most people will probably over time get a 50.
Yeah. And when you hear people that say they got a 15-year loan, you're like, wow, you're doing good. Because it's just, you don't hear of it very often. And that used to be the norm.
Yep.
Which is pretty crazy. So I got to ask you, Danille. Knee-jerk reaction, yes or no? Do you think the 50-year mortgage is good or bad?
I think it's good. How about you?
Good. There's pros and cons like we've talked about, but I would say it's a good thing because I own, and you own, and
Yep.
we're on that side of it.
Yep.
If I was a buyer and I know it was going to drive up prices, you know, there's cons to it, but I would say overall my answer would be it's a good thing too.
Well, but here's the thing is sometimes you have to be on the right side of history, and
Yeah.
those that are sitting there, that don't have any real estate yet, what you have to understand is, people can tell you the 50-year mortgage is horrible. You shouldn't do it. You're going to be paying so much more equity, blah, blah, blah. And that's all true. But if you want to get a home, now's the time to do it before this is enacted or right when this is enacted. You should not sit and wait for a year after this is instated and just see what happens, because you could very well be in a 2020 situation where you have prices going up 20% because people are saving 20%, and so because they're solving to their monthly. So to me, when everyone says don't do it, you really have to look at who's saying that, right? And are they educated? Do they really understand the market? Because this is going to allow a lot of people to get into the market. I'm excited about this for my first-time home buyers, right? Because now, some of them in the Phoenix market, like our average house is for a starter home in Phoenix is like $450 to $550, and I have clients that their really monthly budget is $375, and it is extremely hard here to find a home that is decent, that is $375. So if they can move their budget to $450, this opens a whole new window of opportunity for them, right? And so I'm excited for people for it, but I know we're going to get a lot of hate from people that are older and they own homes and they're like, who would do this? And this is a racket and they're going to be paying all this extra interest. But that's so easy to say when you own a home and you have a fixed 30-year mortgage and you bought it for pennies on the dollar of what it's worth now.
Exactly. And had they not bought that home at that time, they wouldn't be, in the position that they are financially either. So fast forward decades.
And that's part of it too, right? Like say that somebody gets this and they pay on this loan for 30 years and now they're 60 and they want to retire. At least they got into the game and have some equity, right? And they can either, they can downsize, they can sell it and take the cash, whatever they want to do. But, these people can't get into homes right now. So, I mean, how is it being 60 and not owning anything and being a renter, right? And because really, like you can say, yes, you can invest in other things and maybe it'll do better than real estate, especially on a 50-year loan. But people don't do that, right? Like they don't. Yeah. Very few people are astute and put money aside and invest it in the stock market and crypto and all these other things you can invest it in. Most people live paycheck to paycheck and spend the money that they have left over. So if they continuously rent, by the time they're 65 and at retirement age, even my parents, all their equities in their house. If they didn't have their house and they were still paying rent, they would be in a very different financial position, right? They would be very, very tight. Where since they own their home, they don't have a mortgage payment. Even though they don't make a ton of money, they have money to spend on, nice things, right?
Yeah, and the equity makes all the difference. I mean, I do see clients that have been essentially lifelong renters, and I helped a first-time homebuyer last week, and he was probably like 48 to 50 years old, somewhere in there, and happy as heck to be buying a home. And, it would help his payment. He is crunched for payment, single dad. What would that 50-year mortgage have been able to do to him for his affordability for him and his daughter? I think of stories like that, things like that, and that makes such a big difference. So I am really excited to see where the 50-year mortgage goes. Like I said, there's pros and cons, but it's good. I think it's good overall.
There is, and also generational, right? Like, I know that, my parents own a home. So when they pass on, that home is going to go to my brother and I, right? And so even if somebody has a 50-year mortgage and then they pass away, they have 20 years left of it, there's still something to pass on, where like renters don't have that. And there's also there's also a proudness in owning a home. The part of the problem with the younger generation is they don't own anything. They're not invested in an area. They're not invested in a neighborhood. They're just renting and they're just moving around and there's no community there. So I think even just for the sentiment overall to get younger people in homes, this could be really good.
I do too. And it is interesting that the younger generation does just kind of move or rent or, short term. And I like that you mentioned the long-term connection and community, because that's really what makes a home a home. And if the 50-year mortgage helps us accomplish that, I'm excited to see what it brings.
Josh is asking, and this is a really good question actually, is I wonder what the public sentiment was when they brought in the 30-year mortgage, you know? So, and actually what's interesting, I just looked this up. Before the 30-year mortgage, loan mortgages were only 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
So,
What a different world.
What a different world. And so that would actually be something interesting maybe next week we can bring up and dive into, is just exactly what home prices were with the 3 to 5 year loan versus the 30. And then also, you know, what was the public sentiment around it, right? Like, were they happy about it? Were they not happy about it? You know, because it's really a very similar thing that's going on now. And I do think, I think it's going to happen. Do you think it's going to happen, or do you think this is just Trump hype?
Oh, I think it might happen.
Okay.
I mean, Trump does a lot of hype, but I think it might happen. He's kind of floated it and talked about it different times over the years. And there's traction with this. There is traction with these conversations right now.
And I don't think the Democrats would be against it. I mean,
yeah,
you know, the Democrats, I mean, house prices going up doesn't hurt anybody that owns a home, and making it easier for people to qualify for a home is right in line with what they want too. I mean, I just don't see a party, you know, that would be like, no, we need to just let, you know, because this is a sentiment online, is everything just needs to crash and then everyone needs to pick up the pieces, and, you know, but they tried that in '08 and they had to bail out the banks, and the Fed will tell you that they handled that incorrectly, right? That was a disaster. Yep. And because, you know, it's not just real estate that would go down. Real estate would go down, stocks would crash, like the whole thing would go down, you know, and that's not great, you know, and people that don't own anything might say, well, that's great for me because I don't own anything. I don't have any stocks. Well, yeah, but then like the economy goes down too. So you might not even have a job. Like it would all go down in on itself. Right. So when prices go up, inflation's really good for economies, right? Like it's not like not like a hyperinflation, but having inflation versus deflation is good for economies. And so I don't see any pushback. You know, I could be wrong, but I really don't see any pushback on a, you know, government level on either side of the aisle to this.
Yeah, I think by and large, both parties would support it. You know, there might be nuances here or there, but I don't know. I think it might be coming.
Yeah. Well, if you guys are looking for houses, Tara and I are always here to support you. And you can find our contact information below, and we will see you guys next week.
Bye.